Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, today we are going to discuss about a life sketch, Thomas Stearns Eliot. Thomas Stearns Eliot, 1888 to 1965, American English author, was one of the most influential poets in the 20th century, one of the most seminal critics, an interesting playwright, and an editor and publisher. T.S. Eliot was born in St. Louis on September 26, 1888. A member of the third generation of a New England family that had come to St. Louis in 1834. Eliot's grandfather, William Greenleaf Eliot, Unitarian minister and founder of schools, a university, a learned society, and charities, was the family patriarch. While carrying on a tradition of public service, the Eliots never forgot their New England ties. T.S. Eliot claimed that he was a child of both the South, West, and New England. In Massachusetts, he missed Missouri's stark river, cardinal birds, and lush vegetation. In Missouri, he missed the fir trees, song sparrows, red granite shores, and blue sea of Massachusetts. Eliot grew up within the family's tradition of service to religion, community, and education. Years later, he declared, Missouri and the Mississippi have made a deeper impression on me than any part of the world. The Eliots also spent summers on Cape and Bass. These places appear in Eliot's early poetry, but in the 4 quarters of his maturity, his affection for them is most explicit. In St. Louis, young Eliot received a classical education privately, and at Smith Academy, originally named Eliot Academy, he composed and read the valedictory poem for his graduation in 1905. After a year at Milton Academy in Massachusetts, he went to Harvard in 1906. He was shy, correct in dress, and intellectually independent. He studied under such versatile men as William James, George Santayana, Josiah Rice, and Irving Babbitt. He discovered Dante and heard talk of reviving poetic drama among such student personalities as Walter Lippmann, Haywood, Brown, Conrad, Aiken, and E. Cummings. Eliot made a modest impression as a contributor and editor of the Harvard Advocate. He was quietly completing his Bachelor of Arts degree in 3 years and was hot on the track of a new poetic vice. In 1908, he discovered Arthur Symons' The Symbolist movement in literature, and through it the French poet Jules Lefort. From the example of Lefort, other French symbolists, and late Elizabethan dramatists, he began to develop the offhand eloquence, the pastiches and discordant juxtapositions, the rhythmic versatility, and the concern masked by evasive irony and wit that would soon dominate the American British Renaissance in poetry. Eliot's stay at Harvard to earn a Master of Arts in Philosophy was interrupted by a year at the Sorbonne. He returned to Harvard in 1911, but in 1914 he went abroad again on a Harvard fellowship to study in Germany. When World War I broke out, he transferred to Merton College, Oxford, and studied with a disciple of F.H. Bradley, who became the subject of Eliot's dissertation. Ezra Pound, the young American poet discovered Eliot at Oxford. Though they were quite different, they shared a devotion to learning and poetry. After vivacious English woman Vivian Haywood, he taught at Highgate Junior School for Boys near London, 1915-1916, and then worked for Lloyd's Bank. While teaching, he completed his dissertation, Knowledge and Experience in the Philosophy of F.H. Bradley. The dissertation was accepted, but Eliot did not return to America to defend it so as to receive his doctorate. His study of Bradley, however, contributed to his thought and prose style. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Eliot tried to join the U.S. Navy but was rejected for physical reasons. That year, his first volume of verse, Proofrock and Other Observations, appeared, and almost immediately became the focus for discussion and controversy. As literary editor of The Egoist, a feminist magazine from 1917 to 1919, Eliot began the editorial and critical careers that would continue until his death. The back pages of The Egoist were entrusted to a succession of young poet editors. And here, with the aid of Ezra Pound, the new poetry and criticism got a hearing. Eliot was also writing anonymous reviews for the London Times and publishing essays that announced the appearance of a sometimes pontifical but illuminating critic. In 1919, two of his most influential pieces appeared. Tradition and the Individual Talent advocated the depersonalization of poetry and a redirection of interest away from the poet's personality to the poem, the process, and the tradition to which the poem belonged. Hamlet and his problems defined objective correlative, a term soon to achieve wide currency as a particular object, as act, sequence, or situation which the poet infuses with a particular feeling in order to be able to call it up economically by mere mention of the thing or event. In this essay, Eliot demonstrated the need to cut through received opinion to the literary work itself. He declared that the primary problem in Hamlet is not the character but the play, because the character has to bear the burden of an inexpressible emotion in excess of the facts as they appear. While convalescing from exhaustion in 1921, Eliot advanced his diagnosis of war enervated, spiritually moribund Europe with the draft of the wasteland. This was to become, after publication in 1922, the most influential and controversial poem of the century. Eliot corresponded with Pound about the poem, and Pound's drastic editing compressed it, no doubt unifying and sharpening it. Eliot acknowledged Pound's help by dedicating the poem to him in Dante's words as El Miglior Fabbro, the better maker. In the wasteland, Eliot defines alienation and also indicates a remedy. Voices such as Prufrock's and Geronson's are still heard, but Eliot's spokesman is now a mild Jeremiah, a lonely prophet or pilgrim who seeks spiritual regeneration in person and in thought throughout a corrupt city and across a disoriented continent. Spring is no longer the joyous season of renewal April is the cruelest month, for it calls unwilling people to physical and spiritual regeneration, to leave off unsacramental sex and materialistic business. Eliot had intensified and extended the varied rhythms and montages of his earlier interior monologues, and now organized them in a five-part structure deriving from Beethoven's late quarters. While sordid and distracted images still abound, hopeful ones have increased, and a greater tension exists between the two. Social disintegration is equated with a shattered wasteland, but the poem's central consciousness is nevertheless alert to the possibility of recreating personal and communal wholes out of the present and the past, of fertility rites, Christianity, Indian philosophy, and Western literature and art. These fragments I have shored against my ruin. The hollow men, Gerontian, and the wasteland compose a triptych that delineates the estrangement of the self in a society fallen into secularism, with the central panel, the wasteland, suggesting the philosophy of salvaging the self by reconstituting culture out of its scattered parts. In 1927, Eliot became an Anglo-Catholic and a British citizen, with the heightened social consciousness of the worldwide economic depression. A reaction set in against his conservatism. It grew more difficult to explain away on literary grounds the anti-Semitic references in several of his poems. In After Strange Gods, 1934, Eliot took the literary ideas of his tradition and the individual talent and made them apply to culture. He also declared that too many free-thinking Jews would be a detriment to the kind of organic Christian culture he proposed. This work, along with the idea of a Christian society, 1939, and Notes toward a definition of culture, 1948, indicated Eliot's stand against the pluralistic society of most Western democracies without a reconstruction of Christendom. The alternative he felt was paganism. With Ash Wednesday, 1930, while the literary tide was flowing leftward, Eliot emerged as the sole Orthodox Christian among important Anglo-American poets. The title of this six-part poem refers to the beginning of Lent, the most intense season of penitence and self-denial in the Christian year. The poem's central consciousness is an aging penitent, closer to the convert Eliot than his spokesman in any previous major poem. Like his antecedents, the penitent is alienated but from God, not from society or nature, and following the precedents of Dante and Saint John of the Cross, the 16th century Spanish mystic, he sets out to draw near the divine presence. The poem is his interior monologue, narrating his progress and praying for guidance. The tone of unbroken sincerity and passionate yearning, of anxiety and some joy is new for Eliot. The penitent desires to abandon ambition, his fading powers of expression, the enticements of the world, and all that may prevent his mounting the turning steers towards salvation. Though his longing for the vision of God known in childhood is not fulfilled, he progresses toward it and he will persist. American critic F.O. Matheson remarked how Eliot, with paradoxical precision in vagueness, used wonderfully concrete images to convey the mystery of a spiritual experience. In 1936, Eliot concluded his poems 1909 to 1935 with Burnt Norton, the first of what became the four quartets and extended works that proved to be his poetic viaticum. Burnt Norton, in which Eliot makes vivid use of his recurring rose garden symbolism, grew out of a visit to a deserted Gloucestershire mansion. This poem engendered three others, each associated with the place: East Coker, 1940, set in the village of Eliot's Massachusetts ancestors. The last two quartets appeared with the publication of four quartets, 1943. The third, The Dry Salvages, named for three small islands of the Massachusetts coast where Eliot vacationed in his youth, draws on his American experiences. And the fourth, Little Gidding, derives from a visit to the site of a religious community, now an Anglican shrine, where the British King Charles I paused before he surrendered and went to his death. Here Eliot asks forgiveness for a lifetime of mistakes, which no doubt includes his possible anti-Semitism of the years before the war. Each of the quartets is a separate whole, but related to the others. All imply the thematic structure of music and the five movements of the wasteland. The Family Reunion, the first of Eliot's four plays for the professional stage, appeared in 1939. He later observed that its hero was a prig, but its poetry the best in any of his plays. This play, like the other three, implies the familiar conventions of drawing room comedy to encase religious matters. The Family Reunion and the Cocktail Party, 1940, both involve analogues with classical Greek dramas. The Confidential Clerk, 1954, and The Elder Statesman, 1959, even imply potentially melodramatic situations, although they are not developed popularly, for Eliot is preoccupied with individual religiousness and the self-revelations and mutual understandings it affects within families. In fact, The Elder Statesman, the last and simplest of his plays, contending that true love is beyond verbal expression, is dedicated to his second wife, Valerie, following World War II. There were important changes in Eliot's life and literary activities. In 1947, his first wife died, suffering from nervous debilities. She had been institutionalized for years, and Eliot had visited her every Sunday and kept his suffering and deprivation private. In 1948, he received the Nobel Prize and the British Order of Merit, and the list of his honors continued to grow, publishing no important poetry after the four quartets. He devoted himself to the poetic drama, the revitalization of culture, some new criticism on poetry and poets, 1957, the readjustment of earlier critical judgments, and the editing of collections of his poetry and plays. In 1957, he married his private secretary, Valerie Fisher, and enjoyed a felicitous marriage until he died on January 4, 1965 in London. In accordance with earlier arrangements, his ashes were deposited in St. Michael's Church, East Coker, his ancestral village, on April 17, 1965. Many poets and artists paid final tribute to Eliot, including Pound, a grand poet and brotherly friend, W.H. Auden, a great poet and a great man, Alan Tate. Mr. Eliot was the greatest poet in English of the 20th century. Robert Lowell, he was a dear personal friend. Our American literature has had no greater poet or critic. Robert Penn Warren, he is the key figure of our century in America and England, the most powerful single influence overtly Christian in a secular age. Eliot tried to revitalize the religious roots of Western culture. His career recalls the versatile man of letters of the 18th century. Dear students, the question of a life sketch Thomas Stearns Eliot ends here. Let's meet in the next video. Take very much care. Allah Hafiz.